what it looks like when these movements merge together, and that it is important. And some of the questions that came up when we were sort of brainstorming around this is like, how do we build a stronger resistance with all the right sizing that's sort of happening, and how do we get people to recognize the work that we are doing in Detroit from the grassroots, and not have people come in and just sort of take the work that we've done as like, you know, this sort of story that will glamorize the ruins in Detroit. And how do we do more than survive, but how do we thrive with each other? And also thinking about what is a movement? What does a movement look like within the context of the ecosystem that we live in? So is it just one specific thing, or is it many things coming together? And then finally, how do we cross-pollinate and allow these our special sauces, which I like to call it special sauces. How do we put our special sauces together and come up with an amazing gravy that makes a wonderful dish, you know? So with all that said, I'd like to introduce the panel, or they're not a panel, it's our Fishbowl, our representatives. Monte Martinez from the 555 Gallery. This is the space that you are in right now, is the 555 Gallery. Jenny Lee from Allied Media Projects. Lottie Speedy from East Michigan Environmental Action Coalition. And Rhonda Anderson from the Sierra Club. All of which do work together and understand how these movements sort of work within each other. And so your first question is, what do you see the role, or no, sorry, that's the second question. All right, first question is, where does the organization that you represent fit into the emerging movements? And please relate this with a story or one example. It could be from any sort of part of your organizing, Food Justice, USSF, and however. So what is an example of this? Anyone can take it.
Let's see, I'll say 555 is a facilitator of the activist movement by allowing things like this to happen. We also are promoting clean water, which we got a grant from the Earth Foundation this year for a cistern and a green roof in our new facilities. So we're trying to move that direction. It's not our normal direction, but since we're getting a new building, we figured we might as well move into that direction and try to pursue that. Clean water. And we also like to facilitate nonprofits to do what they do. But I must say that we do the left and we do the right. We try to stay centered. That we're willing to go to the right, to the left of the discussion, not just stay on the left.
I have notes on my phone, so that's why I'm looking at my phone. Not text messaging, but I needed some notes to help organize thoughts around this, because it is such a big and sprawling conversation. And so I can start by saying that where Allied Media Project sits in the merging of movements is actually a really special position, which we're fortunate to have, which is being able to see how a lot of movements literally converge through the Allied Media Conference. Every year, it's a conference that's focused on media-based organizing strategies and cultural creative strategies for social justice organizing, and that applies across many movements. So, for example, we have an eco-justice track, as well as which EMIAC and folks have been a part of, as well as a rad art track, which Beehive and many others have been a part of, and then a number of others that converge and share tactics. And so the story that I will try and tell briefly is just, I guess, a story of how AMP has been in the process of developing this concept through a series of workshops and strategy sessions and panel discussions at the Allied Media Conference every year of what a media-based economy looks like in Detroit. And for us, it's been a process of redefining what media is, and also redefining what an economy is, away from just a narrow definition of the news we consume or the media or magazines, to all expressions of communication and culture, and then also redefining what an economy is away from just a measure of how capital flows within a community, to looking at the relationships, the exchange of information, the exchange of mutual support, and how we create safety in our communities. And that process has actually informed a whole realization of how a media economy relates to, or similarly, a digital economy and digital justice relates to food economies and environmental justice work. So we see pretty clearly how media justice and environmental justice synthesize and relate to each other. We can explain, and Lottie, this is something that we've talked about for many years, which is that media is a part of our environment, and the toxins of Fox News and media outlets like that harm us and create violence in our larger, the body of our communities, in the same way that unhealthy food and incinerators and environmental destruction harms our physical communities. But within recent work with the Digital Justice Coalition, which also kind of grew out of a conversation at the Allied Media Conference in 2009, and the Food Justice Task Force, we've seen how we're, in all these different movements, creating new definitions of economies that include, community media centers and community gardens, and how these are both examples of economic convergence, economic development that have benefits beyond just the monetary benefits, but they're about the relationships that we create in the process of growing food together, or the process of making media together, and that's intimately connected to how we create social justice in Detroit. And as a contrast to that, we see the Hance Farms or the Michigan film tax credit industry as alternate versions of how food or media could be used in economic development. But we are aware of so many incredible practices at the grassroots level of people really challenging that definition of what development looks like in Detroit.
Okay, so I'm Lottie Spady with East Michigan Environmental Action Council, and we work in environmental justice, and we do Greener Schools program, which puts indoor-outdoor environmental labs into Detroit public schools and area schools. We have a Stand Up Speak Out program, which is around community advocacy for youth and adults, helping them understand and deconstruct policy and advocate for themselves at the policy level. And then the Remedia program, we create environmental justice media through youth-based environmental media programs and a community environmental fellows program for the production of citizens media, which all three programs are designed to work together intentionally so that so all the Greener Schools components in every school-based learning center, they go through Stand Up Speak Out training and environmental justice media training so that it all works together. The aspect I'm going to focus on is going to be the Food Justice Task Force, just to talk about how that came about. And I like, what Jenny Lee was saying. I want to emphasize or talk about how a lot of this work has grown out of years of relationship building, which the social forum, I think, was a good example of that. It was a 2-year-long rigorous process in relationship building, and I think we uncovered some of the obstacles to working together as community, and the things that grew out of that that were so important, like just having the conversation around undoing racism in the food system, just having the conversation around white allies, what does that mean? Just having the conversation around how do you actively practice the principles of environmental justice or leadership that puts people of color at the forefront, and to model that. It's really easy to we get comfortable with being able to articulate what a concept is, but then putting it actually into practice can be challenging. So the Food Justice Task Force was an example, I think, of that merging of movements or understanding the necessity to work in a different way. We had a situation where a commercial farming opportunity or a commercial farming venture was being proposed for the city by an outside source. And it sort of blindsided the urban agriculture community as to why would this outside group, who appeared to have access to a large amount of funds, be able to come in and do what they wanted to do in the community without ever talking to anybody in the community, without a community-based vision around what the role that farming plays, and how it could be used toward community economic development. Does it reflect community ownership? It didn't have any of those pieces in place. So it caused the urban agriculture community and the environmental justice community to begin to broaden their conversation around what a food justice movement looks like, and how the environmental justice principles and our work, how food justice is an environmental justice issue, and how our work, we can better support the Food Policy Council, the work that's going on around urban ag, and frame it from a justice viewpoint, as opposed to it just being looked at as a means to economic development, which was leaning toward more of a large-scale capitalist sort of model around food production, without actually knowing if that was designed to feed community members. You know, so we began to meet the urban ag and environmental justice folks began to meet, and we tried to identify where were the gaps in the current system. Like we discovered that it seems we do a lot of sort of preaching to the choir or talking to the people that are, the growers are in the room, and the people that are trying to eat healthier in the room, and we have vegans in the room, and we have people that already know, but there's a big gap between, the we in the room. When we talk about we, when we talk about community members, there's a big gap between who's actually in the movement and, we're not talking to the people that are at the liquor store right now. We're not talking to, the people. So that was part of what drove our creation of the Food Justice Task Force as a community-based education initiative around food justice literacy, saying that that's the missing piece, or one of the missing pieces between the urban ag work that's going on now and the ability to actually manifest systemic change. So the program that came about was based on community workshops around connecting folks to local growers, food demonstrations, but then the intentional incorporation of technology into that, which is like a high and low tech approach, by using like Google mapping to identify where in your community are gardens, creation of food, like deconstructing food media and seeing how it shapes our attitudes, beliefs, and values around food, giving folks the opportunity to produce their own messages around it. Like you as a parent, make a story for your child. Like how would you teach your children, the children in the neighborhood, about healthy eating? Let's make a video about that. Let's do a community cookbook around intergenerational stories that are, the heart and soul of what the role that food plays in our culture, the travels that food has made, the way, it's informed our history. So we intentionally created a program that goes from the ground all the way to this use of media, and so it's reflected in our work with the Digital Justice Coalition, and so I think that's all I want to say.
Just interrupt. If there are people coming in, if people could move just towards the middle, so there's some seats open up in the end for folks to sit down.
Environmental justice program here in the city of Detroit. And I said officially because they just changed the title, so I'm trying to get used to this new one. Okay, so I've been doing environmental justice organizing in the city of Detroit now for about 10 years. And most of those 10 years, I think that most of my work has been, as some of the others might describe, in a silo. But let me step back, because I think I missed a major part here. Environmental justice in the city of Detroit is not unusual. if you know environmental justice, and I don't know if you do. But environmental justice is the answer. What's going on inside the city of Detroit is that we have a lot of environmental injustice, okay? And so you have a situation where you have polluting facilities that are almost intentionally or non-intentionally put into communities of color and low-income communities simply because those are the areas that there's less resistance, meaning that the people in those communities most likely will not organize against this incoming facility or polluter, have less resources, political influence, or power. So that's almost where we go to sit these situations. That being said, the larger organization of the Sierra Club, though, as you might know, is your most likely traditional environmental organization. They're out there looking out for the wild places, whales, oceans, and things of that nature. And that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. Because I want my children to be able to grow up and see a whale. I want them to enjoy the redwood forest and all these other kind of things. At the same time, I want my children to grow up, right? So I have this idea in my head of this poster where there's a black child on one side and then there's this blue butterfly on the other, and both are saying, save our environment. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. Now, back to this group here. Because I kind of stumbled across this group. And like I said, I was working in my silo. Although I've come to the realization that I couldn't do it alone anymore. Because one, the problem is so huge, okay? You have industries like the Ford Rouge plant, Marathon Oil Refinery, the only oil refinery in all of the state of Michigan, DTE Energy, Detroit Wastewater Treatment, you name it, we just about have it here in the city of Detroit. And it's in some, most likely some poor community. They host these polluting facilities. So these communities are bombarded by all kinds of toxins that are coming up through the smokestacks, coming up through the sewers, that's embedded in the soil, because the soil is contaminated with lead and arsenic and things like this, okay? So, I came across, kind of by accident, Allied Media Project and Lottie Spady over at EMEAC doing Remedia, okay? So these programs have shown me, one, that by merging with them, the greater story that can be done, the greater story that can be told, the creativeness, okay, which also leads to this thing, this magnificent piece here, okay, because it's telling a story about coal and how and what is the impact of coal inside the city of Detroit. Let me tell you, 90-some% of African Americans live within 30-some miles of coal-fired plant, causing all kinds of problems with asthma, okay, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and other things like this, okay? And if it's not the single source, then it's the cumulative impact with all the other industry. So this merger simply says, for me, this gives us an opportunity to creatively express, tell the story, get the news out, communicate from one side to the other, what's going on in these neighborhoods, and we desperately need to get our story out. So I can end right there. We can